What if I told you that the same civilization that built the Colosseum also had drug dealers operating openly in their markets, that Roman emperors were opium connoisseurs, and that getting high was as normal as drinking wine? Welcome to ancient Rome, where drugs weren't taboo, they were a way of life. Picture this. You're walking through the bustling markets of ancient Rome. The smell of spices fills the air. Merchants are shouting their wares. But here's what might shock you. Right next to the olive oil and pottery, dealers are openly selling opium, cannabis oils, and hallucinogenic powders. No back alleys, no secret handshakes, just normal commerce. The same people we celebrate as the founders of democracy, they were getting high, from emperors in their golden palaces to common soldiers in muddy camps. Everyone was using mind-altering substances. And honestly, can you blame them? Living in the Roman Empire wasn't exactly a vacation. We're talking constant wars, devastating plagues, brutal famines, and natural disasters. The average lifespan was around 35 years. Medical procedures were performed without anesthesia. When your daily reality includes watching crucifixions and gladiators fighting to the death, maybe you need something to take the edge off. So the Romans turned to nature's pharmacy. Alcohol, cannabis, opiates, and psychoactive drugs, including those made from mushrooms, were the drugs of choice. Everybody used them to get high, free from the stigma that exists today. Drugs were just part of the Roman way of life. But this wasn't some primitive free-for-all. The Romans had sophisticated knowledge about these substances that would impress modern pharmacologists. They understood dosage, preparation methods, drug interactions, and even tolerance development. Here's where it gets really wild. These weren't underground operations. Drug dealers were legitimate businessmen with stalls right in the public markets. They weren't sketchy characters lurking in shadows. These were respected merchants who would give you detailed advice on dosage, preparation methods, and which blend would give you the best experience. The Roman drug trade was incredibly organized. Dealers specialized in different substances. Some focused on medicinal preparations, others on recreational blends. There were premium dealers who catered to wealthy Romans, offering exotic imports from across the empire. Imagine walking into your local farmer's market and asking the vendor, "Hey, what's your strongest hallucinogen today? And do you have anything that won't interfere with my work tomorrow?" Because demand was enormous. There were dealers throughout the empire who sold drugs in countless forms: oils, powders, dried herbs, liquid extracts, and prepared pills. They sold them alongside spices and herbs, providing detailed instructions on preparation and consumption. Drug dealers often gave advice on how to prepare substances and how much to use for optimal effects. These weren't just salespeople, they were expert consultants who'd ask about your symptoms, lifestyle, and tolerance level. Want something for pain relief that won't knock you unconscious? They had specific preparations. Need help sleeping, but have important business the next day? They could craft the perfect blend with precise timing. Even more incredible? Roman poets were writing agricultural guides that included chapters on growing opium poppies. The famous poet Virgil literally gave farming tips on cultivating drugs alongside your vegetables. Poppies were grown in household gardens beside plants like lavender and lettuce. Virgil recommended planting opium poppies at the autumn equinox, when parts of the world were half in light and half in shade. That's not just poetry, that's a comprehensive drug cultivation manual. Roman agricultural writers documented cannabis cultivation, describing optimal growing conditions, different strains, and harvesting techniques that maximize psychoactive content. These guides weren't restricted. They were sold openly in bookshops. The Roman drug menu was extensive and precisely categorized. Cannabis and opioids were universally accepted for recreational use. These leisure drugs weren't kept secret. They were used to treat illnesses from earaches to insomnia, but also for pure pleasure. Romans developed complex processing techniques that maximize potency while minimizing side effects. For opium, they created standardized preparations with specific ratios of active compounds, some for pain relief, others for sleep, still others purely for euphoria. But let's talk about Rome's absolute favorite drug, wine. This wasn't just drinking. This was a cultural obsession that dominated Roman society. Although alcoholism as a concept wasn't thought of until the 20th century, It was common across the empire where wine wasn't just a beverage. It was essential for civilized life. Romans drank wine with every meal and considered water drinking barbaric. Wine played a massive role in religion and funeral practices. There were public festivals celebrating wine production that lasted for weeks. Romans had multiple gods dedicated to wine, and achieving intoxication was considered divine communion. Some Roman connoisseurs could identify not just the year and location where wine was made, but the specific vineyard and weather conditions. These were experts whose palates could detect incredible subtleties. Roman wine education was sophisticated. Wealthy families employed wine tutors who taught tasting techniques and social etiquette. Wine knowledge was essential for success in Roman society. Used across all classes, wine was thought to increase strength and sexual potency when consumed moderately. Roman medical texts recommended specific wines for different health conditions: digestive issues, energy, mood, and sexual performance. But excessive drinking had opposite effects. Even 2,000 years ago, people recognized alcohol's dangers. The philosopher Pliny the Elder described alcoholics with pallid skin, drooping eyelids, trembling hands, and dreams of monstrous lustfulness. Pliny documented how chronic drinking destroyed families and careers. He believed excessive alcohol could drive people to violent frenzies and commit crimes. The Stoic philosopher Seneca agreed, believing excessive alcohol caused permanent damage. He was particularly concerned about functioning alcoholics who appeared sober despite consuming dangerous quantities. Roman physicians like Galen documented alcohol poisoning cases with clinical precision. One detailed case tells of a young slave who drank himself into fever, insomnia, and delirium, eventually dying from his symptoms. The politician Mark Antony was notorious as a heavy drinker, whose alcohol consumption became a political liability that his enemies exploited during civil war. Now, here's a story that will blow your mind. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor we remember as a Stoic philosopher, was apparently a functioning opium user who managed his addiction with scientific precision. According to his physician Galen, Aurelius had his opium mixed with honey, with dosage adjusted daily by imperial physicians. This ensured he could sleep without compromising his judgment during the day. But here's the twist. He wasn't a reckless addict. Aurelius was an energetic leader who used opium strategically to manage the stress of ruling the world's most powerful empire. He became an opium connoisseur who could distinguish between high and low-quality ingredients. When he needed a clear head for important duties, he would voluntarily reduce his dosage. Think about that. While writing philosophical works people still read today, while leading military campaigns and governing millions, Marcus Aurelius was managing a daily opium habit with scientific precision. Roman physicians understood opium's dangers. The Greek doctor Nicander described overdose symptoms. Their eyes do not open, but are bound motionless by their eyelids. An odorous sweat bathes the body, turns cheeks pale, and causes lips to swell. Dioscorides, the father of pharmacology, was more direct about lethal doses. It kills. But there was emergency treatment. Nicander recommended, rouse him with slaps on either cheek or by shouting, or by shaking him so the swooning man may dispel the fatal drowsiness. Some Romans purchased opium for suicide. Suicide wasn't illegal in Roman society. Many elderly or chronically ill people chose to end their lives peacefully rather than endure suffering. But these same substances became tools of assassination. Nero had his 13-year-old stepbrother, Britannicus, poisoned with opiates at a dinner party in 55 AD. The poison was prepared by Locusta, a professional poisoner kept on imperial retainer. According to Tacitus, Britannicus lost alike both voice and breath, passed into a coma, and died, leaving the throne free for Nero. Romans loved mixing drugs in dangerous combinations. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii shows wine jars containing cannabis, opium, and henbane, a triple-threat cocktail that could produce unpredictable effects. Ready for shocking revelations? Romans were getting high from plants you probably consider harmless. Daffodils, those cheerful spring flowers, were processed into powerful painkillers and hallucinogens. According to Pliny, daffodils had pain-killing properties, but also caused intense delirium that could last for days. Wormwood, the ingredient in absinthe, was so popular that Pliny complained doctors prescribed wormwood wine too frequently. Wormwood contains thujone, which makes users feel confident and creative, but it's actually a neurotoxin that could cause brain damage. The poet Lucretius was thought to have been given wormwood by his wife that led to fits of insanity and possibly his death. Since we can't prove poisoning from 2,000 years ago, we'll never know if his wife was treating his depression or trying to murder him. Other plants included mandrake, belladonna, and henbane, which produced euphoria, hallucinations, and complete delirium. Magic mushrooms were popular and even used by emperors for making important decisions. There's evidence Romans consumed dream fish, sea bream, that produces vivid hallucinations. Wealthy Romans hosted dinner parties where this fish was served specifically for its psychoactive effects. Cannabis has an even longer history. The mysterious Yamnaya people introduced hemp into Europe from Asia over 5,000 years ago. It's likely that marijuana was imported by Roman merchants from the Scythians, nomadic people from Iran. Herodotus recorded how Scythians would take hemp seeds and throw them on red-hot stones where they smolder and give off fumes. They cover this with mats and crawl under, while fumes emerge so densely that no Greek steam bath could produce more. The Scythians howl with joy at their vapor bath. Romans used this same fumigation process, but developed it into sophisticated social activities. They created elaborate fumigation chambers where multiple people could share cannabis experiences together in comfortable, controlled environments. Dioscorides, who traveled with Nero's army, noted that excessive cannabis use caused sexual problems, making it perfect for anyone needing to control their impulses, like priests, philosophers, or disciplined soldiers. Pliny called hemp the laughing weed and noted it was intoxicating when added to wine. Galen described how cannabis was used at parties to bring joy and laughter. Roman athletes, particularly gladiators, used cannabis and other drugs to manage pain and enhance performance. Gladiator schools had specialized drug suppliers who provided substances for training, recovery, and pre-combat preparation. The military had extensive drug protocols. Roman soldiers received official drug rations, including pain relievers, stimulants for marches, and sedatives for rest. Military physicians developed portable drug kits for treating everything from injuries to combat stress. The sophistication of Roman drug knowledge extended to understanding interactions, contraindications, and long-term effects. They knew which substances shouldn't be combined, which were dangerous for pregnant women, and which could cause permanent damage. Roman medical schools taught comprehensive drug education. Physicians were required to demonstrate competency in managing drug-related emergencies before practicing independently. Perhaps most remarkably, Romans understood addiction mechanisms we're still studying. As early as the 1st century BC, philosopher Theophrastus realized that people could tolerate higher drug dosages as their bodies became accustomed to them. Theophrastus documented how regular users needed progressively larger amounts for the same effects, and how stopping after extended use produced severe withdrawal symptoms. So, Romans understood tolerance, physical dependency, withdrawal, and addiction behaviors. They documented these phenomena with remarkable accuracy, but didn't have modern terminology. Roman physicians developed addiction treatment programs, including gradual dose reduction, alternative therapies, and long-term monitoring. These approaches were often more humane than methods used into the 20th century. Roman society created support systems for people with drug problems, including family intervention protocols and community-based treatment programs that helped people maintain productive lives while managing substance use. But Roman drug culture had serious problems too. There were overdose deaths, addiction-related violence, and drug-fueled crimes. Wealthy Romans sometimes died from experimental drug cocktails at parties. Poor Romans sold themselves into slavery to pay for drugs. Children from drug-using families often developed serious problems early in life. Roman physicians documented cases of infants born addicted to substances their mothers used during pregnancy. The gap between rich and poor was stark in drug access. Wealthy Romans had access to pure, high-quality preparations and medical supervision. Poor Romans often consumed dangerous, adulterated substances that caused poisoning or death. Drug-related corruption was common in Roman politics. Officials accepted bribes from drug merchants, and drug money influenced elections and policy decisions. Despite these problems, Roman society maintained a practical, non-judgmental approach to drug use that focused on harm reduction rather than prohibition. So, what does this tell us? That humans have always sought escape, pleasure, and altered consciousness. The Romans weren't primitive. They were just honest about universal human desires that we've since criminalized. While we've criminalized many substances and created enforcement mechanisms to prevent their use, Romans treated them as normal parts of life. They had drug dealers, addiction problems, overdoses, and poisonings, just like today. The only difference? They didn't pretend it wasn't happening. They didn't create moral panics around drug use. They treated drugs as a public health issue and personal choice. Roman society wasn't perfect. They had serious addiction problems and drug-related deaths. But they also had a more realistic approach to managing these issues than many modern societies. What do you think? Were the Romans ahead of their time in their approach to drugs? Or were we naive to criminalize substances they used openly? Is there something we can learn from their practical, non-judgmental approach? And if this glimpse into Rome's drug culture surprised you, wait until you see what the Vikings were taking before battle, how ancient Egyptian priests used hallucinogens in religious ceremonies, or what the Greeks discovered about performance-enhancing drugs in the original Olympics. Don't forget to subscribe. We release new episodes every Friday that will completely change how you see ancient history and make you question everything you thought you knew about drugs, society, and human nature.